I'm back with Indian-American author Suketu Mehta. His new book, This Land is Our Land, a kind of ringing defense of immigration. Suketu, you make kind of, I think, an original, at least, argument, which is that immigration, including illegal immigration, should be viewed as a form of reparations. In other words, the West has sort of wronged these countries, you may say taken their wealth, and America has wronged, in particular, Mexico, in part by sort of stealing half of it in the aftermath of the Mexican War of the 1840s. And you even make the point that America owes more to the Mexicans, for example, than it would, say, to Asian Indians, because America, you say, didn't do anything to India. I want to press you on this a little bit more, because it seems to me that while you're quite right that colonialism has been bad for the people who lived under it, the question I want to ask you is a different one. Isn't it a fact that Indians living today, including you and me, are better off because of British colonialism? In other words, I'm raising the question of whether colonialism was bad for our ancestors, but good for us because, number one, we speak English. Number two, we're integrated into a global technological systems. We're integrated into global democracies. India is very different than it was before the British. Isn't it a fact that India, even after independence, voluntarily embraced many institutions, from courts of law to separation of powers, checks and balances? These were imports originally from the British. So where is the outstanding invoice, let us say, that, let's say, England owes India that needs to be settled by, let's say, open immigration from India to England? Isn't it a fact that India today is doing well in part because of the benefits conferred originally, not by intention, but nevertheless by effect, by British rule?
Right. This is the argument that they gave us the railways and the language, so we should be grateful. When the British arrived in India at the beginning of the 18th century, India's share of world GDP was about a quarter. So a quarter of the world's GDP at the time came out of India. By the time the British left, 200 years later, India's share of world GDP was under 4%. The colonial enterprise wasn't run for the benefit of Indians. It was run for the benefit of Britain. Among other things, 3 million Indians died in the Great Bengal Famine in 1943 because Churchill diverted ships carrying rice to the war effort. There were endless massacres. Indians weren't allowed to produce their own industries, their own clothing. Gandhi led this non-violent movement for independence, which was an inspiration to the world, but he did it not because the British had conferred this enormous favor to India, but on balance, colonialism was a bad thing for India. Now, we can argue about whether or not India would be better off or worse off. We'll never know because it's a hypothetical. What I'm saying is that it's indisputable that whether it's India or these African countries or Latin America, they have been harmed by colonialism and what replaced it, which is corporate colonialism. Take Guatemala, for instance. At one point, 42% of all the land in Guatemala was owned by one company, an American company, the United Fruit Corporation. The US-funded civil war in El Salvador cost 75,000 lives. The illegal and unnecessary war in Iraq cost 600,000 Iraqi lives. We sell Latin Americans guns, 3/4 of the guns in Mexico and 98% of the guns in the Caribbean come from the United States. We export our gangs. MS-13 was created not in El Salvador, but in the prisons of Los Angeles. And we buy the one product they have left to sell. We're the biggest market for their drugs. So we've caused harm. The rich countries have caused harm to the poor countries. Two nations, Britain and France, created 40% of all the borders on the planet. And in many cases, these borders were atrociously bungled. If you look at a map of Africa, it abounds in straight lines, the political map. These maps cut through traditional tribal nations, which ensure a condition of permanent strife between the nations. So, all I'm doing is connecting the dots. History has consequences. And these people are coming here because colonialism and corporate colonialism and war and climate change have continuing effects on these people. So they're coming here not to rob and to rape. Immigrants in the United States commit crimes at far lower rates than the native born, as the Cato Institute has shown in this landmark study in Texas. For a large part of the 20th century, the Republican Party was a pro-immigration party. It was Ronald Reagan who created an amnesty for illegal immigrants. So, the country was built, and this is why I love the United States of America. This is why I'm proud to call myself an American, because it's a country made up of all the other countries. This is the American exceptionalism.
Yeah, Suketu, well, I really appreciate this dialogue, because although I have a lot to say, I actually want you to speak, because as you know, in the American political debate today, even this kind of exchange where, let's say, my audience gets to hear from you is quite rare these days. The kind of discussion across a spectrum doesn't occur. And so the kind of debate that you and I could have, very little of what you said I directly disagree with. Now, I believe that the real wealth of the West was created internally. In other words, although you're right that in the year, say, 1500, India was one of the richest countries in the world, so, by the way, was China. What happened is that there were internal developments in the West, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Enlightenment, the Scientific Revolution, so that even if the British had never set foot in India, Britain would have advanced, I think you would agree with this, relative to India very quickly because of those internal developments in Europe that later also created the military power that allowed a tiny island like Britain to subjugate, 60% of the real estate in the planet. You can't do that if you don't have a massive technological advantage. So we won't resolve these issues, Suketu, but bottom line is I take you to be saying that you love America and you want America to open its doors because it's a good place to live and lots of people want to come here.
And it's better for America. So in my book, I lay out the economic benefits of immigration. If it were not for immigration, in recent years, US GDP would have been 15% lower. Over half of all the companies in Silicon Valley were founded by immigrants or their children. 40% of all the life scientists, these are the people who are coming up with vaccines for COVID. 40% of all the life scientists in the country are immigrants. If you look at our universities, if you look at our farms, the country would fall apart if it were not. You and I are immigrants. We're here having this debate, and I believe we're contributing to the country. And I think the US is by and large a pro-immigration nation. We understand because, all of us can trace our families, except for the Native Americans. We all came here from somewhere else. And deep within our bones, we understand that. So I think we should have these debates. And again, I'm not calling for open borders. I want to be very clear. I'm calling for open hearts. So what I'd like to ask of your audience is, you may disagree with me about the root causes of migration. You may disagree with me about immigration as reparations. But ask yourself this. If you were a Guatemalan mother, or a Nigerian father, and you saw your children starving because you couldn't grow crops in the fields, or they were menaced by the gangs, you knew that your children would grow up either impoverished or die. What would you do? Would you do anything in your power to pick up your child and take them and cross whatever borders, face whatever ordeal to give them a better life? This is what everyone who came to this country, this is what their parents did. And this is the same thing that these parents are doing today.
But Suketu, one thing that your parents did and that I did is we also recognize that there is a line and there might be poor people from other countries who got ahead of us in the line. And so there is a legal system by which we can have our applications considered. And that there is something, it's understandable, but nevertheless unlawful to try to jump the line. Hey, we'll have to leave it right here. Suketu Mehta, thanks for joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.